My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with national best-selling author and speaker, John O'Leary. John, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Drew, it's good to be back with you, man. So good to see your face again.
Definitely. I want to get into a conversation about your career, your speaking, where you come from. And I think the best way to start is just by asking about your public career. You've accomplished so much in your public career, most of which stems from your incredible childhood story of surviving an explosion that left you with nearly impossible odds of recovery. Now, what do you tell people about your story who are learning about your work for the first time?
Hmm. Normally, I begin by saying that no one expected anything from me long term in life, including the one speaking this sentence. I got burned, as you're hinting at, on 100% of my body at age 9. And my dream after coming out of the hospital, that's 5.5 months in hospital and dozens of surgery, tons of struggles, was not to become a speaker or an author or podcaster or influencer. It was to become normal. So my desire at age 9 and 10 and 15 and 20, all the way through my 20s until my late 20s, was just to fit in. Like that's what I drived to succeed at, and did it all right for a while. But my life began to change fundamentally when challenged by a friend to say yes to being used for good. And it was this vague notion. I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. Say yes to being used for good. But 2 days after that conversation, I was invited by a group of Girl Scouts to speak at their event. You know, this introverted, awkward guy who had never told anybody his story decided to share the story with three. And I felt like I did a pretty poor job of it. But one of the individuals in the room, one of the dads, said, "John, that was awesome. Would you speak at my Rotary Club?" And I said, "Yeah." So one of those ladies was in Kiwanis, and one of those individuals was a Chamber of Commerce member. So this guy, man, the man you're interviewing right now, just kept stumbling his way forward. And I've had the joy over the last 20 years of speaking in 50 states, dozens of countries, millions of people by saying yes to the next chance to serve. And I think there's a lesson in there for all of us.
One thing leads to another, and here you are after so many different links. What difficulties are there when you're sharing so much of these like personal and potentially traumatic childhood stories with complete strangers, whether it's a room of people you're speaking to or an audience for your newest book? What is that experience like?
So the odd thing is, the more vulnerable you go in life, the more people come up to you afterwards and say, "Dude, me too." And so when I'm speaking at middle school, high school, college, professional leaders, anywhere around the world, you share the story that you think it's going to be like, well, if they have scars, maybe they'll connect. If they went through something as a kid, maybe they'll connect. If they're in the middle of a storm right now, maybe they'll connect. But the reality is, anyone who's ever been through any hardship, and that's you, Drew, it's every one of your listeners and viewers, understands that they still bear the scars from that experience. And so something that amazed me early on, and it's actually what keeps me both humble and hungry today, is to share as vulnerably as I can, because in doing so, it allows me afterwards to go to the back of the room and one by one meet these individuals who are in this big, massive room, but meet them as individuals. And frequently, as I said, the sentence they begin by sharing is this: "Dude, it's a different story, but this thing happened to me." And then they go on to elaborate from there. So I realize now, 2 decades into my profession, it's really not about speaking. It's about listening, and it's about making yourself available to the folks one to one afterwards.
It's incredible how well your story connects to all these different human beings, regardless of the circumstances that they've lived through. And it connects to people so much, and it's grown so much in popularity that there is currently a film in post production based on your book, On Fire, and it's starring William H. Macy. What was your initial reaction to finding out that this project would be going forward?
Probably the same reaction as when you asked it right there, and it's been going forward for 7.5 years. So my reaction 7.5 years ago was, "This will never happen. You know, I don't feel worthy of that." And my reaction now, that it is just inches away from actually becoming finalized in a big way, remains the same. You're speaking to a guy from the Midwest, from a big family, who feels grateful each day just to have the opportunity of life. And the fact that what we once took for granted, both our story, but also our lives, is now being celebrated on screens around the country and around the world. And you mentioned Bill Macy. You know, he's a huge celebrity. And yet when you meet him, he's a normal guy. He filmed this movie in St. Louis, Missouri, my hometown. My wife and I and one of our kids went out to visit him at his home in Aspen, Colorado, a couple months ago. And Bill answers the door in sweatpants and no shoes on, brings us in, makes my son tea, makes my wife a coffee, just serving. And so one thing that has amazed me throughout this entire project is not just the caliber of individuals who are getting behind the film, but the humility with which all of them operate in their lives. And I think that's probably part of what attracted them into this movie. It's not a burn story, man. Not at all. It's a story about recovery. It's a story about community. It's a story about life.
That's unbelievable. And it's so cool that you're close enough friends with him where you could just casually call him Bill. William H. Macy to us.
Well, he likes to be called Billy Boy. So I don't feel comfortable enough with you yet, Bill, to call you Billy Boy, but that's the title he likes. Bill, it plays Jack Buck. Jack Buck was this radio announcer from the greatest generation, fought overseas, received a Purple Heart, came home, built up a career, built up a life, went into the Baseball Hall of Fame among 6 other Hall of Fames. So this was a successful guy. And yet Jack Buck never lost sight of the goal of success is ultimately to use it for good, to be put in positions where you can elevate the lives of others. So when Jack Buck, that's who William H. Macy portrays, learned about a little boy who got burned, Jack stepped into the gap and served me, learned I was going to die, and then comes back to the hospital the following day to encourage me again. We've been surrounded by individuals our entire life who just saw an opportunity to serve, recognized that they could make a difference, and then had the audacity to just show up. Then they came back and then they brought friends. And I think as we look around at the many challenges we face societally right now, if we could follow a similar pathway, we may not change the world, but we would change a piece of it. And if you do that enough, you can change the overall world.
It's so easy to see why you became such an inspirational speaker after being surrounded by so many figures in your life that were inspirational to you yourself. If I could flip the question on you real quickly, you're an inspirational speaker, but why do you think so many Americans today are uninspired in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah. Well, we're looking down rather than up. We have a 2 inch by 3.5 inch supercomputer in our left hand. We're typing some comment about how the other side is wrong with the other hand. What I would encourage all of us to do, and I'm looking at my friends on the left and the right and the middle and everywhere else, is to put the phone away for a moment, wake up earlier than you probably typically do, look east, and just watch the sunrise. I think if we can do this with a humble heart, you will be overwhelmed at how amazing life is. That does not make it perfect, does not make it easy, does not make it right yet. But if our buckets aren't relatively full, how in the world can we animate ourselves and activate ourselves and serve as agents for good if we already feel broken? So one of the very first things I would just encourage all of us to do, I make my kids do it. They resent their dad most days, but we wake up early, man. We watch the sunrise, we listen to the birds sing, and we start our days recognizing how blessed we are. Then you can step into the day. Then you can recognize the challenges that are all around you and they exist. But then you can also have the agency to do something about it. So if you were forcing me to make a political statement right here, my fellow Americans, I would encourage them to pause long enough to recognize how blessed they are, and then to take the next right step forward, and then the next right one. And one more thing, to recognize for those of us who have been blessed in one way or another, you're called to share it. You're called to be generous with the gifts that you've received and elevate the lives of those around you.
It seems as though in that worldview, you have such a positive relationship with admiration and love and all these other positive emotions. And I've watched footage of you speaking, and you've said in the past that you believe the two biggest motivators on the planet are the emotions of fear and the emotions of love, and how they're always at odds with one another. What do you think is your personal relationship with those two emotions?
Yeah. Well, you did your homework for this
Sure did.
interview, man. I'm really being grilled right now. I feel like my back is up against the wall and I'm beginning to sweat. Fear and love. I mean, they are the two big motivators in all of our lives. And here's the truth. I show up from a place of fear. I know my human heart, man. I'm nervous before you hit record. I'm nervous before I take the stage. I'm nervous before you ask a question. I'm nervous when I get a call from school and it's the principal because I know what's about to come next. Like I live before we take off on flights. I fly about 100 times a year. I'm nervous on every flight. So what do you do with that anxiety? What do you do with that fear? I try to pay attention to it, but not to be suffocated by it. And what I found is if I can push back against it with both knowledge and love, I can do things that I otherwise would be unable to. So with love, like my mission statement for life, the reason I say yes to interviews like this and the reason why I say yes to speaking events and podcast opportunities and writing books and everything else, even the movie, it's because of this. I choose to thrive in my worldview because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. And then finally, no excuses. No excuses, John. Don't let fear get in the way of making a difference today. So the reason why I am able to push back against my fear, which shows up in almost every step along the day that I make, is because love is bigger. Love is better. Love is far more attractive. And ultimately, love wins. So, man, I think if we pay attention to why we do things or don't do things, frequently we will find that fear is a big reason. But what will give you the courage to step on anyway is if you operate from a place of love.
Wow. Very, very well said, John. I am glad that you took this interview, and this has been a fantastic conversation. I think we have time for one more question, and we always end these interviews on a question like this. So feel free to answer it however you'd like. What advice do you have for young people?
Wow. So I have a son. My oldest son now is a freshman at college, and sending him off was a gift, but very hard. I had no idea how hard it would be to hug my own son goodbye and leave him in the dormitory. You know, who knows? This little boy that I've had at my side for 18 years is now beginning to lead his own life. And I wrote, I've never shared this, but I wrote an 8.5 page letter to him. It's basically a love letter. It's something that I wish my dad had been able to do when he still had the ability to speak and write. My dad has Parkinson's disease. He modeled a love letter his entire life to me, but I never received these words. And I knew one day my son might long for the words, like the wisdom that his father had for him. I wrote my son this long letter. And one of the expressions I used a couple times that I learned from my mother was this. It's this expression, this too shall pass. And it was the sign that used to hang on our kitchen wall at home, this too shall pass. And I think my mother hung it up. My father was a business owner. All the kids were fine academically and athletically, and we had friends all around. So the sun was shining on the O'Leary family. I think it was her reminder to all of us, yeah, but this too shall pass. Subsequently, we've dealt with mental illness. We've had suicide ideation. My father got Parkinson's disease. One of her kids, the one you're talking to, got burned and burned down the entire house. 15 years after that house fire, my mom and dad had a separate house fire. Their home burned out a second time. They're dealing with financial hardship, and yet the sign still lives on in their lives. This too shall pass. And so what I would tell any young person who I've not yet rocked to sleep with this long answer is this is a fact of life. Are you ready for it? This too shall pass. So if you feel like you're on top of the world right now, I'm glad, but recognize it's a moment. And if you feel like you are beat down by the world right now, I get it because I've been there. But in both cases, this too shall pass. So be grateful for what you've got. Have courage to keep stepping forward. Recognize that something is going on even bigger than what's taking place in your own life, but you've got to be part of it. You've got to actively engage. So keep showing up and recognize the best is yet to come.
This too shall pass. John, that is a beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Honored, man. I just appreciate you, and I'm grateful to spend some time with you.
Absolutely. That is going to conclude our conversation with John O'Leary. John, thank you again for your time. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you, Drew.